Hello and welcome to Lightways at Life Astrologer with me, Anna Isabel, a psychological astrologer and analytical hypnotherapist. And well, I'm always excited with my guests, but occasionally I get super excited. So I'm super excited this morning because I have Marcos Patchett back. Hello, Marcos.
Hello, Anna. Thank you for having me again. Thank you.
Well, how could I not? When I discovered that you are doing the Kepler Decumbiture classes coming up on February the 11th, I believe it is.
Yeah, that's right.
And so I've joined up.
Yay.
And thought it would be a wonderful subject to discuss here on Lightways. So tell us about Decumbiture. We've talked a little bit about this before, but it might be good to refresh people's memories, especially if we have new viewers who aren't familiar with Decumbiture.
Okay, yeah, no problem. So Decumbiture is an old Latin term, meaning but it's a specific term from traditional sort of medicine and also traditional astrology, but it means, it comes from the same root word as recumbent, as in to lie down, but it's a word for a type of astrology chart cast for when a person gets ill. So traditionally the chart was cast for when the person felt so ill that they had to go and lie down, hence the name. So, and it was used in traditional sort of medicine, usually in the sort of like higher classes, like upper classes, because those were the kind of people who in the old days could afford to keep astrologers, sort of in medieval times and Roman times and so on. But in the sort of Renaissance era, when astrology was sort of proliferated a bit more in Europe, it would have been used by the average physician as well, to varying degrees. So it was a kind of astrology done when an illness began to give to help guide prognosis, to help guide diagnosis, and to help guide treatment. So in a sense, it was a bit like a sort of medieval X-ray, really, but did more than that, because it would sort of give context. So the plus of it is that it can give a much broader overview than an X-ray or a CAT scan can, but obviously it's far less specific. It won't tell you what the particular cell going wrong is or whatever. So there are limitations to its diagnostic capacity, but it's a very useful branch of astrology that obviously has been, a few people still do practice. I'm one of them, but it's been sort of very much sidelined, and so I want to teach it.
Well, I was just thinking about consultation charts,
Yes.
because I would guess that there are similarities to a consultation chart.
100%. Thank you, Anna. Yes, very good point. Yes, so they're basically used interchangeably. So a consultation chart and a because a lot of the times you don't have a decumbiture, because I sort of make the glib sort of joke that people don't often sort of have a stroke and look at the clock just as they're doing it. People often don't know the time when they get ill, and obviously something like that, an accident or a stroke or something that's very sudden, does have a specific time of onset. Many illnesses don't. So hence the use of the word decumbiture, because it was like, well, when do you do a chart for an illness? Is it when you first feel a bit sweaty, or like that last Thursday when you felt a bit off but then you felt all right for a few days, and then it would be when you got so sick you had to lie down. So the chart that was used for a decumbiture very often was that chart time when you had to first lie down, the modern equivalent of which would probably be a hospital admission time, but very often people don't have them. So what you'd use as a substitute, what was traditionally used as a substitute, would be the time of a consultation with a physician. Modern equivalents might be the consultation time, or the time that you go for an important medical test, or the time that you receive test results. Now you might say, what aren't all these different charts? Well, yes, but they're all cross sections in the same process. They're all thresholds or nodes in the same sort of timeline, if you like. So just as with a human life, you would have a birth chart for a human, like when the first breath was taken. You'd also have event charts for different points in the life. So you might have the chart of the first day at school, or the chart of the first day beginning a new job, or the chart of a marriage. And those charts would speak to what would happen subsequently in that particular circumstance. So in an illness, if you can have the decumbiture, the first or earliest chart, then great. But if you haven't got that chart, then the next best would be something like a consultation chart, or the chart of the time when results were got, because all of those charts will speak very specifically to the set of circumstances surrounding that illness.
But they also tell the story in a sense, because it's a bit like looking in mundane astrology. If you're looking at, let's say, the chart for France, for instance,
yeah,
where you have the first French Republic, and then the Second Republic, and the Third Republic. And if you look, they're all related to each other.
yes.
And the reason is that moment in time is capturing the transits to the original chart. And so there's of course going to be a relationship between all of these different
100%. I mean, sometimes that relationship is not immediately apparent, but it depends where it falls in the timeline. But yes, so broadly speaking, if you're talking about the same illness or medical circumstance, the charts will say the same or similar things, but they might say it in different ways. But sometimes you have very startling examples of this. I had a client last year who had gone in for some dental work, and she had all of her charts for the times of appointments, and they were all different times. Like one was 8 a.m, one was 12 p.m, and one was, but they were a couple of months apart each. Every single chart had Virgo rising and like a similar significance. I mean, you couldn't make it up. It was brilliant, but that doesn't always happen. So that was just showing that this situation hadn't shifted much. And then each chart was like, so the first chart was like, okay, this is going to be around a while, and this doctor isn't going to help you much, but the next one might help you a bit more, but there's going to be some problems. So that was the first time of the diagnosis. The second one was this referral to a dentist, and it showed that this dentist was a good dentist, but there were some problems coming up. And then the third chart was a complete mess. There was Mars in Taurus on the midheaven and whatever. And that was the chart of this treatment she'd had, this dental treatment, which had gone horribly wrong and caused her bad pain. So that was the first two charts were showing, oh, this is okay, but there's this problem coming. The second one was this is okay, this guy's good, but there's this issue coming right up just around the corner. And the third chart was the chart of the issue. Do you know what I mean? So it was so interesting just seeing how that plays out. So yes, but sometimes it's you really have to take the charts apart, because if they're very far apart in the timeline, or it's a chronic illness that might go through several phases, the charts can look quite different at different stages. So yeah.
Just thinking about some of the things you were saying there, and I guess maybe what I'd like to focus on for a little bit is significators, and the obvious one is the illness. So where do we look to understand the illness?
Okay, so I follow the sort of Renaissance method that's sort of like William Lilly, Culpeper, sort of the English astrologers who used it. There were older methods, which I'll mention, but the Renaissance method would be, you would look at the 6th house region of the chart, which is to say the bit just under the western horizon, to represent the illness and particularly its ruler. But I'd also look generically at Mars and Saturn, the two naughty planets, because usually one or the other of them will be causing issues in a chart. Not always, but often, because Saturn is the significator, the general significator of chronic illness, and Mars is the general significator of acute or infectious illness and accidents. So you'd usually look at those, but the specific significator in a chart is the 6th house and its ruler. And then, of course, for the person and their health, you'd look at the 1st house for their body, and the ruler of the 1st house, and also the moon. The moon will sort of give a general indication of where things have been and where things are going. So you can get a quick and dirty approximation of how things are going just by looking at the strength, which is assessed in various ways, of the 1st house ruler the ascendant ruler and the moon, versus the strength of the sixth house ruler. And also any planet that's, and then lastly, so significates the illness, sixth house and its ruler, Mars or Saturn potentially, although they won't generally be causing problems if they rule the ascendant, because as Culpeper says, the devil never hurts his own, which I really enjoy as a Scorpio rising, but you know, whatever. So the point is, the malefics, as we know, they're called that, but they aren't always malefic. They can be helpful in various circumstances. So if you've got, but anyway, I won't get into the weeds there. The point is, Mars and Saturn can cause problems, but if they rule the ascendant, they usually don't, because they represent the person. So it's not going to cause a problem, but maybe the other one would. And so if you've got a Mars ruled ascendant, look more to Saturn. If you've got Saturn ruling ascendant, look more to Mars. The only there's always caveats here. The only caveat there would be if you have Saturn or Mars ruling the ascendant and they also rule the sixth house, which happens, of course, when Scorpio rises, and Aries often is on the cusp of the sixth house, or the 12th house, which is the house of vices or self-undoing, which often happens when I think is it Aquarius rises, and sometimes Capricorn is on the cusp of the 12th. That can indicate that the person's own behavior may be driving the illness or contributing to it in some way. It doesn't always. You've got to look at the rest of the chart, but say you've got Scorpio rising and Aries is on the cusp of the sixth, that means the ruler of the sixth house of illness is going to be the same as the ruler of the first house of the person. So how does that work? Well, that can mean that the person is driving their own illness, depending on where Mars is. Now, if Mars is in Scorpio, in the rising sign, that person is going to be pretty healthy, like they're going to have quite strong constitution, and while their behavior may be in some way contributing to their illness, they're mainly going to be favoring their own health. But if Mars is in a more difficult sign, say it's in the 12th house, then they might be undermining their own health quite actively, inadvertently, but that might be happening. So there's nuance, but the headline here is the sixth house and its ruler, and Saturn and Mars will usually represent the illness. There are a few other points you can look at, like the part of illness, which is an Arabic part and its ruler, but generally speaking, those are the three factors that I'll focus on. Yeah.
I asked the question because people often get confused about where to look for illness, and I've always read sixth house. That's that's the prime. That's it. But it's exactly like a birth chart, because as I say, there are other things you can look at. You can look at if there's any planet in the chart that's causing problems. And what do I mean by that? Well, I haven't got like a week to cover that right now. But it can be a planet that is giving, say, hard aspect to the ascendant, the sun, the moon, or the ascendant ruler. So that's showing a potentially difficult relationship. Now, if that's a helpful planet, all else being equal, like Venus or Jupiter in hard aspect, that's not going to cause a problem unless it rules the sixth house of illness, the eighth house of death or anxiety, and the 12th house of vices or problems that may be caused, in which case it could represent something that's problematic, an aspect of the illness. So other planets can also show up. So as I say, there is nuance here. You have to look at the chart and see which planet's shouting at you, but it's exactly like a birth chart where, for example, in relationships, the first house and the seventh house will show partners. So the relationship between the ruler of the first and the seventh will show the specifics of your relationships, but then you will always look to Venus to show the generalities in relationships. So if somebody's Venus is messed up, like mine is, they might have fewer relationships or more issues in relationships, but then you'd look to the specific rulers of the first and seventh houses to see how they got on in the relationships that they do have. Do you see what I mean? So it's a bit like that with Saturn and Mars as general rulers versus the sixth house as its specific ruler. The sixth house will always say something about the illness, and its ruler will always say something about the illness. But then you've got these sort of general rulers as well. And sometimes the general ruler, or even another planet that's not the sixth ruler, if it's causing loads of problems, might be showing you the most important symptoms, or the part of the body which is most affected, even more so than the sixth ruler. Does that make sense? It does, yes, of course,
Okay.
because as we know in astrology, everything is is complex because it's the relation the whole chart. We
Yes.
trying to take it apart, but then we have to put it back together again.
Yes, yeah, but there are the good. Yes, exactly that. But the good news is there are systematic ways to help take it apart. So it doesn't have to be just like you look at the chart and you can sort of like take things apart methodically and then put them back together. And I think that's what I like about traditional astrology. It's not so much that the stereotype of it is that it's hidebound and formulaic and that, Saturn's always bad and Venus is always good or whatever. It's not that at all. It's just that there's ways, there's methods of taking things apart that are systematic, that help you navigate through that sort of confusion. And if you follow those steps, you can then make a clearer picture.
That is true of all astrology. However, whatever we're reading, that is the whole point, is that you do have to take things apart and that it can be very systematic. And as I keep teaching my students who occasionally have bits of meltdowns going, it's too, and I'm going, no, that's why you're going to break it down.
Yeah, yes, exactly. It's really like, yeah, it's true. It's like anything. It's like you have to make the first steps and get into it and take things apart. And if you feel overwhelmed, then take a step back and start at the beginning. That's what you look at. So the beginning in this case would be 6th house and 6th ruler, Saturn and Mars. What are they doing? Do you know what I mean? And that will give you information straight away.
Yeah. And that's wonderful. I love that there's within the chart, there's kind of written in the potency of the treatment or how well you are going to do in being able to help this person. Well, I find that fascinating.
It's fascinating. It's sometimes disturbing because you're really hoping to help this person, of course, and then it says you're not the person to do it. That can be a tricky one to navigate in these days, because back in the day, of course, if somebody came to see the astrologer and the astrologer looked at the chart and thought, I'm not going to be able to help this person, they tell them to go away. Well, you can still do that in private practice. I've done that for a few people, but what usually if they're coming to me for astrology, I'll read the chart and then say, I may not be the person to treat you, but I can tell you what's going to go on here and what other things or other types of people might be able to help you. So you can use the astrology in that case to point them towards somebody else. But it becomes tricky when you have somebody who's really not coming for the astrology. When I just look at the chart for my own R&D, they've come to me as a herbalist, and then this chart says you're not. So in that case, I just have to sort of be a bit more cautious in the treatment of the person. And this is where you have to walk a line, because you don't want to put in their head the idea that the treatment's going to be awful, because that's a guaranteed way to scupper any treatment and also to upset people. But you also want to, so the way I usually do it is if it says, for example, that there might be problems with the medicine, which is shown by the 10th house, usually in a consultation chart, or the treatment on offer, then I'll usually sort of say, so let me know if there are any problems. Just, I'll say this anyway, but I'll emphasize it. I'll say, if there's an issue, just let me know. Maybe send me an email next week. Just let me know how you're doing, blah, blah, blah. So that I sort of emphasize to them that I want them to update me sooner. And likewise, if it says there might be a problem with the practitioner, with me, but the treatment's good, then I actually find that a bit less worrying, because it's like, all right, well, I might be having a meltdown over this client, but if the treatment is going to be successful, then great. I actually sometimes worry a bit more if the 10th house is messed up, because often as a herbalist, I'm prescribing treatment. So if the 7th house is messed up, then maybe, I don't know, I'll be ill while I'm treating them, or, maybe they'll hate me or something. But if the treatment works, then great. So yeah, you're absolutely right. It's fascinating, because the 7th house will show the therapist or the astrologer in that consultation, or if it's a decumbiture, if it's right at the beginning of their illness, it'll show all the people who are going to be involved in the treatment as the other person in that disease scenario. And then the 10th house will show the treatments that are going to receive. So it's handy. But I think I've said when we've spoken before that I'm not a Stoic. I like Stoic philosophy, but I don't believe things are set in stone. So I think we have this information for a reason, so that you can avoid the pitfalls and bear traps, so that if a chart is showing you something that's a bit messed up, you can go, oh, that could be a bit messed up. So then you try and you can do something about it. It's my experience that things will show up, but how severely they show up, I think, is amenable to adjustment. And, you know, I've had a few charts where it's shown that. And the example I usually give is my own birth chart, because I would be dead according to my birth chart, because it's in medieval astrology, it's a third differentia chart, which means it's the chart of a child who dies in infancy. And I did have to have major surgery at the age of 1.5, which means I'm alive today. That tells me two things. Firstly, that the astrology is working, but secondly, that it's not set in stone. You're fated to experience certain things, but you're not fated to a particular outcome, if that makes sense. So that's the utility of it, I think, not to scare everybody silly and make everybody run away and say, I'm not treating these people. It's kind of, which sometimes they used to do for good reason, because there was a much higher rate of mortality and whatnot, and doctors could do that. But I think it's so that we can use that information, if that makes sense. That's how I've kind of like squared that circle in my mind.
So you said utility, and I think utility made me think of uses. And obviously for you, there is a very practical use for these charts. How do you feel it would be useful for those who are not in a medical profession?
Yeah, exactly. That's a brilliant question, because actually, if you look at a great number of really good historical astrologers, they were all really into medical astrology. Not all, but many were, many big names in astrology. And I think that's because, firstly, just from a technical standpoint, learning the medical astrology really develops your astrological skill. Because if you're going to make a prognosis about an illness, like when things might develop and when things might occur, you then get to follow that up. You then get to see how things develop. And you're going to be sort of guiding treatment. You need to be somewhat accurate with your astrological assessment. So I think that's a technical, and also there's loads of techniques in medical astrology that really are transferable to other areas, such as, for example, the timing techniques. It's brilliant for timing. So a lot of the timing techniques are incredibly useful in any other predictive area. So there's the crisis points technique, where you're really looking at sort of lunar returns or solar returns, and the like breakdowns of those, like half returns and quarter returns of the moon for acute illness, and the sun of chronic illnesses, making charts for each of those. And so that really develops people's astrological skills in general, I would say. That's point one, the technical side. Point two would be, it's incredibly useful to be able to do this work, even if you can't apply it personally therapeutically, because if you or somebody you know is in a medical situation, you can look at the chart and sort of say, okay, how competent is this doctor? Is this doctor the right person for that person? Is it, maybe they're good at this, maybe they're not so good at that, and maybe there's another person who I can see in the chart somewhere who could help them out. How good is this treatment? Is this treatment appropriate? Is there some other treat, you know? And so you may not be able to prescribe the treatment, but you could do some sort of analysis, and that can be very helpful. So obviously, if you see that the 7th house of the physician is messed up, it doesn't necessarily mean that you should go and throw the chart in the face of the physician and start, because then they might have you thrown out of the hospital or something. But it does mean that you look at that and go, okay, so what about why is this physician a problem? What's the issue there? And it may be that there's a sort of personality issue. It may be that there's simply a chemistry issue between the patient and the physician. So if you have the 1st house ruler and the 7th house ruler in opposition without reception, that just means you're going to butt heads, or the patient, whoever's chart, you know, decumbiture or consultation chart you're looking at, is going to be butting heads with the doctor. They're not going to communicate well with each other. So maybe that's a sign to change to another physician. Or for example, the treatment, it might say the 10th house is really good, really strong, but that it's also somehow linked to the 6th house. So for example, when you have hardcore, quite toxic treatments like chemotherapy, you will often find the same planet ruling the 6th and the 10th houses, the house of illness and the house of medicine. That is normal in those situations because the medicine will cause serious side effects and often significantly contributes to the patient's actual sickness. You know, in a lot of cancer treatment, the cancer might be the thing that will kill the person if it's left untreated, but the thing that makes them feel really freaking sick is often the treatment for that. Does that always mean that the treatment is the wrong one? No, not necessarily at all. So I've seen situations where people are on chemo and the 6th and the 10th ruler are the same, but that 10th ruler is weighted towards benefit. So yes, this will harm you, but it's actually going to have a good outcome. So maybe it's worth going through all that crap, you know. Whereas if on the other hand, it's tucked away in some horrible, it's like in the 8th house and messed up. It's like, maybe speak to your doctors or your team about an alternative treatment strategy. Maybe you want to be speaking to other people about it. So this gets into an interesting area because, of course, astrology is not currently scientifically accepted. And there's sort of like a whole ethical minefield here, which we do talk about in the course. So, you know, from a pragmatic sort of level, you have to kind of, I would say you give your recommendations, but make it clear that they're coming from astrology and that nothing is set in stone, and it's something to bear in mind. It's not something you should sort of just take without checking it out. You know, verify any information given in an astrological consultation. And as an astrologer, it's I think this is true of any practitioner in any profession. It behooves you not to be arrogant, not to assume that your reading is 100% correct. But on the other hand, you don't want to ignore it if it's information that you're being given. So you just give the information and then you say, but look, there are, you know, I may be wrong about these things, but this is what I see in the chart. This is what the chart might suggest. So maybe just talk to these people and see. So, and people will come to you in various, you know, sort of states and conditions and states of mind. So some people will be very set on a particular course of treatment, no matter what you say, and others will be, you know, so it just depends. You've just got to be honest in what you say, while also being mindful that A, you may not be right, and B, other people might be really pissed off if you say something, and C, you don't ever want to put something really negative in a patient's head. So this is one of those fine points which we talk about in the course, where say somebody's in a tricky situation and the chart looks bad. What do you do? So say somebody's got a terminal diagnosis and they're coming to you and they're really hoping for some ray of light, and the chart sort of looks difficult. The way I usually would do that is to not give them a definitive, this is going to, you know, no, you're stuffed. I'd say, you know, look at the chart and say, okay, this looks tricky, but it reflects the situation that you're in. And, you know, this is the timeline. If you can get past this point, then, you know, you might be out of the woods, or things might be able to take a turn upwards. Here are some things that can help you. So you emphasize the things that can be leveraged or utilized for good in the chart. You give them a timeline, say when things might be difficult, but what you don't say to them is, now you're stuffed, you know, because that's not helpful. And I think it's also untrue. As I said, I've got a third differentiator chart, I'm still alive. So I think, you know, even the most, you know, so I've heard horror stories about astrologers actually predicting a specific time of death for people. And I think unless the person is really on their deathbed, and say it's, you know, there's certain circumstances where that might be ethical. Say if it's a person who knows that they're dying, who knows that they're on their way out, and they want to sort of get their affairs in order, and they're asking you, when might that happen? I think as an astrologer, you've got a fair remit to take, you know, do your best in that scenario and give them a time. But in just about any other scenario, you want to be mindful of giving people accurate information, but that is helpful and skews towards increasing their locus of control without ever writing the script for them fully, because that is to take away their agency.
Well, I mean, we're talking about this in the context of medical astrology.
Yes.
But I have lost count of the number of clients I have seen, both as a therapist and as an astrologer, who have had doctors tell them things that are absolutely shocking, because they are doctors and they can. and in many cases, thankfully, they've turned out to be wrong. But it's the way the delivery, the information is delivered is absolutely brutal. And I, as a hypnotherapist, fully aware of nocebo effect.
Yes. It's a curse. It's a curse. When people do that, it's actually a curse.
It is a
You're
curse.
cursing somebody.
Because immediately the subconscious takes that as an instruction being given by an authority figure. Yeah. And there is literature that shows that people who could be fine, given an instruction by the doctor that they're going to die, are more likely to die than if they were given the opposite, which is what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And there is so much on that. And also, of course, when we're talking about looking at the therapists themselves and their ability to help, or their restrictions around helping, and we're then thinking about the therapeutic relationship, which we know to be one of the key ingredients in a person's ability to get well. Do I trust my doctor? And do I trust my counselor, my therapist? That therapeutic relationship is the beginning of healing. So if it works, it's great. If it doesn't work, please do go and see somebody.
As an issue. Yeah, exactly. And so yes. I mean, there's so much there. I totally agree. I've seen that many times. There does seem to be a little bit of a double standard, one might say, sometimes with the sort of like, but I from a sort of orthodox medical perspective, I suppose they'd say, oh, well, our scientific method has proof, your astrological method does not. Ergo, you're not allowed to say that. And I'm like, well, yeah, kinda, but then it's mistaking the map for the territory, really. The statistics, I loathe it when people are, because like, what I'm talking about with prognosis in disease, the typical case where the doctor says something really brutal and upsetting to a patient, like, you will never recover from this, or this is lifelong disease, or you've got, the worst. I don't think doctors ever actually, well, maybe they do sometimes, they shouldn't ever say you have X months to live. But what they will often say is, oh, in the average case, people might live 4 years or something. And that's pretty much what the patient hears is, I have 4 years to live, or I have 4 months to live, or whatever. And actually, in reality, most of those stats are a bell curve with outliers on either end. And what that means is effectively some people recover. Now, you could say, oh, it's a very small number of people. Yeah, but what is it? So you obviously, there's books, and we're talking in cancer, there's the book Radical Remission, which I recommend any cancer patient reads, and stuff like that. Just so the factors that can play into being one of those outliers on the right end of the curve, which everybody should aim to be. But yeah, no, it's an interesting one. And so bringing it back to the astro, you can see all that kind of stuff in the chart. That's what's so useful about it. That's what I mean about it being a medieval X-ray, but it's got a much broader remit than a modern X-ray has, even if it's less granular.
And it's what you said as well about, suggesting other things that are supportive. So I mean, just 2 days ago, my lovely professor was talking about how she's got a serious back issue, and basically was told that nothing could be done for her until she was in agony. And that this, of course, was inevitable. And I looked at her and I thought, I don't like that.
No.
I thought, I don't like this. I said, no, look, there are going to be things that you can do. How about you consider, going to see an osteopath? How about you speak to a yoga a friend of mine who's a yoga teacher who also had a back issue that yoga sorted out, and see what she can help you with in terms of strengthening the muscles in that area, so that the spine is supported. How about look at, going to see a nutritionist to improve, the nutrition so that you're actually building your bone density, etc.
Yes, 100%. There's always ways to increase a patient or client's agency and there's no situation so dire that can't be improved. Of course, the cynic would say there's no situation so dire that can't be made worse. That is also true, but obviously your aim as a therapist is to improve it, or to give them tools to help that person improve it. So it's I think that's one of the main uses of it for me. But for for anybody non-medical, you can use that medical astrology in that way to sort of look at timelines, sort of when events might occur, and what kind of events. Is this a stressful or difficult event? So I might need to sort of just go in for more tests, or just hunker down a little bit more during that period, just check things, be more careful with my regimen, yada yada yada. Or is this a period where I'm likely to get some support, and where might that support be coming from? And might I recover? Could I recover at this point? So it's really useful for the timelines of things. And in really difficult charts or really difficult situations, I often emphasize the elasticated nature of astrological time. So say you've got a frame, or fractal is probably a better way to think of it, because it ripples, like it could be now, or now, or now, or now, and it's probably something of that nature will happen at all of these times. So say you've got an indication in the chart that something might happen in 10 units of time, weeks, months, years. If it's a good thing, you want to bring that forward. And there are sometimes astrological timing is very hard to shift, because if there are loads of indications that that thing is going to be happening then it's probably going to be happening then. But sometimes it's not quite so clear cut. So you might say, okay, this is suggesting to me that there might be wiggle room. Maybe that 10 months could be pushed back to 10 years. So say you've got somebody coming to you with a problem that they don't want to recur, like maybe somebody's had a first attack of MS, or they've got a cancer diagnosis or something that they don't want to relapse or recur. And the thing says there might be a relapse. That significator is retrograde. It's coming back in 10 whatevers. Your job is to try to elasticate that window, to try to knock it up to the next fractal, so say it's got a possibility of recurring. But I think if we're judicious, let's look at the things in the chart that can help us prevent or ameliorate that, and then knock it up to the next thing. So this is a tricky ethical line to walk, because I don't like to be putting the thought in people's heads that something is going to come back. But on the other hand, if the chart tells me that something is likely to return at a particular time, I would be remiss in my duty as an astrologer if I didn't point that possibility out to them. So I think the way to do it halfway is to emphasize that they have agency here, and that any situation, the chart is there as a dashboard warning light, not as a graven in stone, this is going to happen. It's saying, look, here's a pattern that's developing. Let's see what we can do to interrupt or alter that pattern. So something of that is going to show up, but it could show up much more mildly than you think. And I have a few chart examples of that, where we had a sort of this lady coming for chemo years ago was and I always think of the cancer charts because those are the most ethically tricky, difficult charts, because not only because they're difficult situations in terms of the emotions involved and the potential severity of the outcome, i.e. death, but you've also got the medical profession involved in negotiating all of those people and their beliefs and what they're putting into the patient's head. They're the trickiest ones. So those are the ones that tend to stick in my mind. But this patient was going in for chemo, and it looked like she'd have really severe side effects. It was breast cancer, I think. So she was on tamoxifen, and she was on this other stuff that was going to give her flushes, menopausal symptoms, lots of heat and neuropathy. So looked at the chart, said this might be happening, so let's put you on some herbs to reduce that. And in the event, when she actually went through the treatment, she did have some of those sweats and stuff, but they were much milder than I'd have anticipated. And I'm 99.9% sure that is because of all the plants and measures we took beforehand to sort of reduce the symptoms that she'd be experiencing. So this is the value of it.
And that's the thing. And as astrologers, we have wide experience of this in any case, because you see a Pluto opposition coming to your moon, and rather than hiding under the bed, might be
which you might feel like doing, to be fair.
Yeah,
but
exactly. So, it's coming. It would be better to ask, how can I use this Pluto energy? Because when we're asking, how can I use this Pluto energy, what we're doing really is saying, how can I prepare and make the best of this time? So I think that's much better than looking at it and thinking, I'm doomed. So
Yes.
it's a much better thing. So, you've got Pluto opposing your moon coming up. So what clearing out do you need to do internally? Would it be a good idea to go and see somebody who works with chakras and have some healing to bolster your energy system?
Yeah.
Got issues with your mother that you need to
Address. Yeah.
correct. Have you got is have you got your insurance updated in your house to include subsidence? Because
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
it's looking at it like that, so that it's not a powerless thing. It's an energy that you're engaging with,
Yes.
and it's not meant to destroy you. And that brings me to my reason for being interested in medical astrology, because for me, and already with the very limited understanding that I have, I can begin to think about the mind-body connection. What is it that I'm supposed to be working with here? What is this telling me? What is the calling? What is this illness calling me to do? And if I can understand more about the illness, then I can be in a much better place to help my clients
100%.
on that.
Yes, 100%. I think that's lovely, Anna. That's exactly right. I did a talk a few years ago that's still one of my favorites, on, I can't remember what I even called it now. I think it was called Remedying Difficult Directions or something like that, which is about exactly that. It's about the way we're supposed to, I believe, use astrology is to interpret the difficult, the good and the difficult things, to find basically sort of liabilities and talents, or the positives and negatives, you could say, but liabilities and potentials. That's how I look at it: potentials versus liabilities. And to identify, once you've identified the liabilities in the chart, the difficult things, you then sort of go, how can I leverage that? What can I turn that into? What can I do? And there's, sort of like I like lists. I've got Virgo midheaven. I like to break things down into, categories and stuff. So I think I did, like there would always be a sort of practical, a mindset thing you can do, a practical thing you can do. And then if you're so inclined, a ritual or magical or just a symbolic thing you can do. So you could do something, just the Heisenberg principle, which you can rely, I wouldn't rely on, but it's a useful thing. By observing something, you change it. Yes, that's true. Just by knowing the astrology when you're going through one of these transits, that can help, because you're like, apart from anything else, it's going to end, and when. So that is very medicinal in and of itself at times. But you've also got the awareness of what it might be trying to do for you. So it doesn't feel like you're inhabiting this hostile universe and life's just throwing crap in your face, which it can feel like if you're going through a really difficult time. But you've kind of got a symbolic understanding of why this is happening. That's really helpful. But then you've also got the practical stuff, which you were talking about. What can you do? How can you leverage that? So I love the examples you gave about checking the moon, Pluto, checking your house for subsidence. I'd say mold as well, maybe stuff like that, just anything that's going to rot it or take it apart. But just when I had, because I've got a Sun, Moon, Pluto T in my birth chart, yay! So that's fun. But in terms of so fermenting food, I make a lot of sauerkraut. I don't know. I mean, that's more of a Moon Saturn vibe actually, but it involves a little bit of Pluto. But I think Pluto's a lot more fundamentally. Saturn is slow and fermentative, whereas Pluto, I think, is quite destructive in its action usually. So because it removes things you don't want. So I really like the idea about having some sort of house purge Like you could physically have enemas, or you know, obviously not too often because you don't want to strip the colon lining. People who go mad for colonics, it's probably not a great idea to have a colonic every week. Just a thought. Yeah, maybe occasionally if it's indicated might be good. But anyway, but just so enemas could be one physical way that could play out, but another way might be, as you said, some sort of house clearing thing. Literally, just going through the sort of Marie Kondo, who I love. Marie Kondo's, you know, has a house tidying thing, but I really like that idea of having some sort of purge of your house. So you're getting rid of, particularly you know, when you get to the category of sort of the lunar stuff might be sentimental items, you know, so that you're going through all of your items and discarding that which has doesn't make you happy anymore. So that, and then a ritual thing, you could come up with some sort of moon Pluto ritual. I mean, hopefully doesn't involve sacrificing babies or anything too horrific. You can come up with something. You could come up with something that was
smudging.
yes, exactly. You come up with something benign, like this is my Scorpio rising, go immediately towards the most horrific possibility I could think of. But just so smudging, yeah, something like that would be lovely, where you've got some lunar signification, like your home or like water or food, and then the Pluto signification. So you could sort of take a dish of food that represents something that you want to get rid of. I don't know, like maybe your most hated food as a child or something, and then bury it in the garden, and then say a few words about, you know, with this, like, so you're signaling to your subconscious the desire to process, get rid of, turn something that was unpleasant into something more useful. Or I don't know, there's various ways that I haven't thought that through, but you can come up with little, because that's what I think ritual is. It's a way of if you're just on a purely materialistic level, taking any magic out of it, although I am a magical thinker and I'm quite happy to be one, but I think if you're just to look at it on a purely psychological level, you're signaling things to your subconscious every time you do a ritual. So the ritual should just be some. So I'll give you an example, because this is one I have thought about, rather than just trying to come off with random stuff off the top of my head, which never really works well. I always need time to think about it. Was when I was finishing at my university teaching clinic in 2018. The clinic was shutting down. They were shutting down all the complementary courses, and I'd been there for 5 years, and a lot of the staff, you know, we were all a bit down because it was happening. The last day of term, there was a lunar eclipse, and the moon, it was a south node lunar eclipse, and the moon was with Mars in Aquarius. This is when the south node was in Aquarius. So I thought, how could we do that? And then I just thought, okay, so the moon, south node, Mars eclipsed. So there were acupuncturists in the clinic. So I said, right, I want you to get some needles and we'll wrap it in a bit of silver foil. And I want you to write down a few things that you want to get rid of from your life after this clinic closes. And going forward in your career. So I got everybody to write, and they were all happy to do it. Everyone participated, which was great, because I thought, you know, this crazy astrologer member of staff, you know, but they were all up for it, which is great. So they all wrote down stuff they hated, that they didn't want in their career, and said, we don't need to see it, just scrunch it up. We put it in a ball with all the used acupuncture needles in the foil, and then we threw it in the medical waste bin. That was it. So it was like a little parting ritual, just to kind of symbolize, okay, this place is closing, but we're getting rid of things from our career and that sort of encapsulated the sort of moon, Mars, south node getting rid of. Mars would be the acupuncture needling kind of things that you hate. The moon is the that was the silver in the foil, but also just the sort of, I think, getting rid of things that emotionally upset you, because it was an eclipsed moon in Aquarius. So that was a nice little really simple ritual. So by ritual, I don't mean necessarily lighting candles and donning vestments and doing stuff. It's literally just translating the astrology into some action that speaks to your subconscious and could function as that did, as a sort of like socially unifying little thing.
And it had to be, because it was Aquarius, so it had to be a group.
Yes. Yeah.
But I was just thinking that what you did there was you also did something else that was very important, as you set an intention for what, by deciding what needed to be discarded, you set an intention for how things were going to be moving forward. So it's a very important thing to do. So as you say, it has a value beyond or within
Yes.
the psychological model. It has a very important value which cannot be underestimated. And that's without considering
esoteric or magical action. Yeah, absolutely.
It has a very valuable role to play. So I guess the thing we really do need to do is to tell everybody about your course. So I'm hoping that we have whetted people's appetite to learn more. And the question I asked you, which I expect will be going through many people's heads, is how much work will this entail outside the actual lesson? Because it was a mission for me to be able to do this.
Yes, yeah, no, I know. So yeah, there won't be tons. There will be a little bit of homework every week, but that homework, it's a 5-week course, first of all. So it's not a massive long. So there's going to be 2 courses. This first course is on consultation chart and decumbiture, mainly focusing on prognosis, i.e. timing techniques and development, and sort of what you can use that for, with a little bit of remediation, a little bit of how you can use the chart for remedy. So it's 5-week. Then the second course, which will be coming up at some point after this one, so maybe in 2 or 3 months, will be on diagnosis from decumbiture. How much work? There'll be every week there'll be a forum, like I pop a little question just to think about in the forum, like a scenario or a question about a chart, and then I say that everybody on the course just needs to leave something constructive in the forum, just like a couple of lines to show that they thought about it, you know. So some people write a massive essay, other people just leave a paragraph. As long as you're sort of looking at it and thinking about it, that's the key thing. I just want to see that people have thought about it. So that's not that should take like 5 minutes or something. Then each week there will be a quiz. It'll be a 10-point quiz, probably take about half an hour to do. So it'll be a half-hour quiz every week, sort of multiple choice quiz, just 10 questions, and a forum thing which takes about 5 minutes every week. But then the course runs for 5 weeks, and then the coursework is open for another, I think, maybe couple of months after that. I'll probably make it a month because it's only a 5-week course, but another 4 weeks after the course finishes, so people have chance to just catch up on anything they haven't done. There is also a very short final exam at the end of it. It's literally just 1 page of A4 with 3 questions, so it's not overwhelming, I don't think. It's just really to test comprehension and to show up if there's anything that you think you've understood that you haven't. So that's obviously why the work is there. Yeah.
Good. Well, that sounds manageable even for me. So that's very exciting. When does it start? And how? This is an online course. First of all, I think you know this is an online course. So it doesn't matter where you are in the world. The only barrier could be time zones. I don't know, but it's specific time that we're working with, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. So it's set for, in the UK GMT, it's set for 8 p.m. on Saturdays, the lessons, but the lessons are recorded. So if you can't, and in America, I think that works out something like 11 a.m. Pacific time. I think most places in the world that time is okay. I think there might be a few regions where it's like 3 a.m. obviously, but I'm hoping that those are fairly out of the way regions that not many people live in. so it should be manageable for most people, but the lessons are recorded. So if you can't make the lesson, you can go back and it's, you know, the recording is available all week, or well, until the course ends. So you can, the recordings are available once the lessons happened. That recording will be available online. So yes, and it starts on the Saturday, I think it's the 11th. Let me just check my calendar. I always get this date wrong. No, it is I think it's Saturday the 11th of February is the first week. So yeah.
And I also noticed that if people were to sign up before the 28th, there is a discount. The 28th of there is a discount.
Yes.
So if you are interested, it's worth bearing that in mind.
Brilliant. Thank you, Anna. Yes, thank you for that. So, and I'll supply you with a link. So hopefully these guys will be able to sort of click on that. And if anyone's interested, go straight there. So, yeah.
Good. And other than that, if people wanted to find you, how do they do that?
Okay, best way is probably my website, which is nocturnalherbalist.com. And I've also got a small YouTube channel, which I've been posting on very seldom. And this year I'll be posting on even more seldom because I seem to have my in tray seems to be quite full at the moment. But I am going to be keeping it alive, if only sort of occasionally. And that's a YouTube channel of the same name, Nocturnal Herbalist, where I just do videos about sort of occasionally medical astrology, sort of health related stuff, herbal stuff. Yeah.
Fantastic. I'll put a link to that in the description as well. Mark, thank you very, very much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. It's been an absolute joy once again. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you all for watching. And next time we're going to be looking at cookery and astrology. In the meantime, do remember, if you are interested in learning more about astrology, you can also check out my website and find out more about courses that I'm running. Until next time, goodbye.